January minutes. We've had several meetings since the last one that you were at, and what we did was keep them up here in case somebody wants to go through them rather than read them as a group. I think we'll also do the same thing with the treasurer's report, if that's all right with all of you. But I would like to mention one thing. We're up to 250 members at this time, and that's families. So that's quite a few people in town. I'd like this time to introduce our directors. Start off with Vice President Hyde Carrington. Ed Spega is our secretary, and he had another conflicting meeting tonight, and he should be here shortly. Bob Britton Jr. is our treasurer. Alice Button is one of our directors. She's back there selling books. Isabel Anderson is right there with her. I think she's selling books also. And Bob Britton. This makes up the 7 directors that we have. We also have 2 people that should be honored this time. One is the operator, and if you've sent anything into the Historical Society, you've probably received a prompt reply from our assessor, Willie Bricker. And the other one is the one's responsible for all the goodies in the kitchen and our publicity and things like that, Edie Carrington. And right now, I think probably a motion is in order. Hi, would you like to make a motion? You were going to second it, right? I think that the organization should be expanded from 7 directors to 9. And I would like to do that, if I can get a motion to that effect.
Second.
Everybody in favor? Opposed? So moved. Now we need 2 people for our directors. Ernie?
Yeah, I nominate Edie and Will.
Second. Everybody in favor of Edie and Will? Edie Carrington and Willie Britton. Believe me, they deserve it. All opposed? Congratulations, you're new director. Some of the things that I'd like to touch on are our plans for the future, and we hope to continue with these meetings about every quarter, and we do anticipate skipping the summer quarter. So we'll have about 3 a year covering various subjects. We'd like to keep it to something that you're interested in. We don't want to get off into the history of the United States or the world or something along that line. We want to keep it at Bethany. And we've had a lot of suggestions, some of them like the fire department, the airport, dairy farms, and I heard one yesterday, the fox farm. A lot of people here probably won't even remember the fox farm. And the old town hall. And we're looking for more subjects, so if anybody has an idea or something that would be interesting to quite a few people, let us know, or let one of the directors know, and we'll get to work on it. And speaking of the old town hall, we've had a lot of action on that since the last time we met. The Episcopal Church has voted to turn it over to the Historical Society. Rather than having it destroyed, we figured we'd accept it. And now all that has to be done, I think it has to go to the diocese for approval. And then we have to take it to the town to have the mortgage, which is about $15,000 balance, and have that excused or written off. And that will probably be on the call for the May meeting of our town meeting. So we're moving along pretty well. And I can't believe we've got that building. It's just fantastic. It's one of the older town halls in the state. In fact, it might be the only one, but we're going to hear more about that probably around 29 April. Bob Britton Do we have any inputs from the floor? Anybody like to tell us what we're doing wrong or something else that we should be doing or anything along that line? And remember, you know all the directors, so give them a call. We're your committee. It's your organization. We're just here to sort of keep it rolling. Okay, before we get into the evening's entertainment, our speakers, I'd like to get a motion to adjourn the business meeting. Second. Business meeting is over. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers. Ed Karoll and Ken Gooch. These gentlemen would like to come up here and tell us all about the churches of Bethany. Bob Britton would normally do this, but he can't talk too well tonight, so we're letting him off the hook. Gentlemen?
You ready to start?
We're ready.
The problem is, I think, possibly, I hope that everyone can hear with this and it's clear and all that sort of thing. If anyone can't hear at any time, there is going to be the problem that I'm going to tend to look at the screen, leave the mic, and if you find I'm doing this, just raise your hand back there and let me know that I'm no longer in communication. This is a rather interesting challenge that a couple of us were given on a couple of weeks ago when this was supposed to have been presented. Was rather a short period of information to get together something like 200 or 300 years of history and tell you the entire story in 30 minutes. Then the reverse started to take place. We had an extra couple of weeks to work on this, and the very reverse took place. We now have accumulated enough information that we could go on easily for 3 hours. How on earth do we put it in 30 minutes? So I will do my best to get through a little bit on the Congregational church, and when it comes 30 minutes, if somebody will stop me, I'll stop, and we can do it again next time. First, before I start, I would like to say that the real historians in town are Alice Button and Hazel Hoppy. And from their written material as a source comes most of the stories that we're going to tell that go back beyond 1855 or so, because being asked to put on an illustrated talk with slides before anybody had a camera to take pictures is a little bit on the difficult side. So most of that information comes from there. There is also an excellent book on the Amity Parish that was written by Reverend Whitlock. This book, which Alice edited and reproduced, I would strongly recommend to anyone that's interested in Bethany history. It's for sale in the back, and it really does a great job of covering a lot of the history on the two churches. And then you know that they've also produced a book Alice has on the various houses and buildings in Bethany, but it's much more than that. When you start digging into the genealogy that she has gone through, you find that there are several stories also in there that tend to augment what's in the book. Is the fire out? That's quite all right. It's just like home. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to start
we're all set, just gotta turn
We're
off the
all set,
lights.
it's up to me.
Yep.
This is an interesting slide that was put together as your publicity. Sue Wallneck did the artwork, and I challenge you to tell me which one of the two churches it is. Before we get through with the evening, I think I can help you a little bit. Introducing my end of the conversation is this church, and the reason for having it in there is twofold. One is that you notice how the sign reads. First Church of Christ, as you can see quite clearly, Congregational kind of sneaks in there. And the reason behind that is that in the early days, Congregational was not part of the name. Most everybody knows it, or knew it at that time, as simply the First Church. Even, well, I hate to say that, but Christ got dropped out of the picture too frequently. So if you go by the cemetery down the road, which also was not the first cemetery but has a sign on it, it also says First Church Cemetery. Now, this is supposed to be a talk on the churches at the center, and strangely enough, it was not the first church in the center either, as you will hear later on. The churches actually started in this part of Connecticut as Amity Parish. As you know, churches started this section coming into New Haven, and there was New Haven Colony somewhere around 1643. And then 100 years later, when people started moving up the tremendous hill to get up in our area of town in Woodbridge, come winter time, they said it was too far to go to get to New Haven, and they got winter privileges to build a church in Amity Parish. A parish was a theological or religious group. Towns were not as towns when they first started out. They were so-called ecclesiastical societies, and as you know, the relationship between church and state was pretty strong. The church ran the state. After 1750, Amity Parish built a school here at what is Rocky Corners. I don't know how many of you know where Rocky Corners is, but that's Old Amity Road and Myers Road going down to the old cemetery, which was the first cemetery, and we'll hear a little more about that later. The strange thing about this schoolhouse was that it was a two-story schoolhouse. Whether they had that many children at that point, or whether they were making a multi-use building, but the Masonic Hall was in the upper floor, along with many other activities at that time, because it was the hall of this area of Amity Parish. In 1763, roughly, Bethany also went through this period of having complained about the distance to go to get to the first church that was built, which is now in Woodbridge, and they got winter privileges for 3 months or a quarter of the year from December to March, and then started a parish here, which then took the name as the Bethany Parish. And they built this church starting in the latter part of 63, I think it was, and then it took them up until about 1769 to complete it, and then in 1803 they added the steeple. This is a custom that I was not aware of till I started looking at our own church when we were having leakage up there in our steeple, and after many puzzling times and visits up there, it came to us that yes, that steeple was put up sometime after the church was built. This steeple is a little bit on the interesting side because it leads to a story, true or not, but it is in the records, that one night the kids thought they'd have some fun with the sexton who came in every Sunday morning to ring the bell. They turned the bell upside down during the night and filled it full of water. Now, unfortunately, it didn't work. As far as the sexton went, he didn't have any bell, and there was a crack in it. And from then on, it never sounded quite the same. That same bell was later, when they built the new church, which we'll come to, was moved up there for a while, too. Now, that church was located in behind what I refer to as Islib's house. You may know it as the Dayton house. You may know it as Dr. Whoever can remember Dr. somebody's house very recently. Mason, thank you. And in behind this church sits just about where the Reverend Stephen Hawley's, the first minister, had his house. And then behind that was the green, so-called the Bethany Green, and behind the green was the church, and then there were buildings around the church. And the interesting part about this school at Rocky Neck that we talked about was that was moved up here. And it went on, I think, the south side of the green, and it was used for what they called a church house, or a place to go in between services. It seems that we have to have two services on Sunday, or come all that way, 6 or 8 miles. So they'd have a service in the morning, sitting there about frozen to death, except for the few wealthy people who had little heaters for their feet. And then they would go to the Sabbath day house, warm up, have dinner, and come back to go to the service again before they went back home. This is why you needed a shed for the horse. And here is, we've already moved uptown a little bit, but we stuck this in here because of the historical nature of it and to show you the mode of transportation used to get to the church. In 1831, they decided to tear down the house, the meeting house on the hill that was on the green down south, one hill below us, down the other way, where they had started out the center of town and for some reason abandoned it. I've been trying to find out by reading if anywhere we could find out exactly what they had in mind and why they decided to move. So far I have not. Except that when these churches were first established, they had to get permission from so-called General Assembly, which at that time was in the state of the New Haven colony. And it is recorded in there, in some of the votes that were taken in the church, that when they first obtained permission to put that first church that we showed on the other slide up on that hill, 30% of the voters did not want it there. Another large group were indifferent. And that got down to only about 30% that really wanted it there because of the steepness of the hill that they had to climb going up what is now Dayton Road, or in that vicinity, to get up to that green. But it is kind of a puzzle that in only 60 years they decided to tear down one church and build another. And the only thing that sort of makes sense out of it is that Woodbridge did the same thing. Now, this church is kind of interesting. Okay. You notice that there were horse sheds for this church on what would be the south side, as well as we will see later there were horse sheds further up the road for the Episcopal church on the other side. Before I get to this, one of the outstanding things about all of these churches that were started at this time was the period of time that the first pastor remained in service. Most of them were apparently they all started with pretty much young people coming over and young people moving out, as would be sort of natural. The pastor himself served for 40 years. So there was a lot of stability during this time. And this is true of the New Haven colony, of the Hartford colony, the Woodbridge Church, as you know. It took its name from their first pastor. He was there over 30 years as well. Note that this church had a steeple up on top, in addition to it, over and above what you've been accustomed to seeing. And that disappeared sometime, and as yet I haven't been able to find out the date of when that left the ceiling. But as far as most of us have ever seen, the top of the steeple was here, and the weather vane was reinstalled on a new roof. It's very evident when you get up there, and I have some pictures of the inside of the steeple here that might be interesting to you, the structure of it and so forth. But the columns that went up through there were all rotted off at the top. So this church had its hard times at some time or other, and things kind of deteriorated. Now, in 1860, the church was greatly upgraded and improved, and certain innovations were made on it. Because the picture that you see back there that we just looked at, if you'll note, there are no columns, and the front is closed in. So at some time prior to that, or at that time, they closed the porch, which used to look like this, which is the Woodbridge Church, and made several changes inside, and one of which was said that they lowered the gallery. Now there's another term. If somebody will help me what it means to lower the gallery. In my day and age, that would be bringing down the two upper balconies on each side of the church. But I have a hunch the gallery in those days was where the pastor stood. And if you've been in some older churches, you'll note that the pastors were up extremely high, sort of heavenward, and looked down on their audience, and also it was easier for them to address the people who were in the balconies. And of course, most everybody filled the church. The first churches that were built were something in the order of 40 by 50 feet. They were larger than, and the Woodbridge Church, first one, was something like 45 by 65. They were larger than the churches that they built subsequently. Our present church is only 37.5 feet by 50, a little bit narrower. This sort of indicates why on earth on the springtime and so forth that they wish to be able to attend church closer than 7 or 8 miles. And the road was not quite like we're used to seeing it today, nor was the scenery. As you know, things are kind of bare there. This is a picture of a picture that was taken in 1903. And there are several interesting features in here that I would like to point out. If you note right along in here, you can just barely see it, but that is a stovepipe. There is also one over here. And if you look back in this corner, over here there's an object, which I'm quite sure was the stove. So that at that time, in 1903, when this pastor was in service, the two stoves on the back conducted their heat to the public by these pipes that went underneath the balconies. You'll see that there was a pump organ down in the front, and then in the center here is the old pulpit, which we're using today since we're not in the sanctuary at the moment. It's being repainted, and we resurrected this, and we're using those same chairs and that pulpit in our services in the parish house at the moment. This picture was put in to show you Perry's Hall. home for the pastor as the parsonage. This didn't last very long. Apparently they had their ups and downs as we do today. And shortly after it was built, it was sold to the first minister that moved into town. He then in turn lived there for several years and then sold it to Mr. Perry. But before that was built, and there's a point I wanted to make. The house that preceded this on the site where the parish house was built was owned by Hezekiah Thomas. And when they tore down the church on the Lower Green, he bought the schoolhouse that was at Rocky Corners and then moved to the Bethany Green and brought it up here, set it in back, and used it as a hotel. And it eventually became part of a boys' school and had several other functions. It was even a site for some light manufacturing. When that was torn down, this house was built, and then it eventually came into the hands of a fellow by the name of Perry, who kept this boys' school alive and built this hall as a gym. And the reason I mention it because this became the town hall. All the functions that were put on by the ladies' aid at the church, by any activity where you needed a mass meal, all these functions took place in this town. This hall, known as Perry's Hall, all the entertaining at the evenings where they put on plays and that sort of thing. So it was really part of the church as well as part of the town. This is a picture of a gathering in 1913, which was the 150th celebration of the church. That is not representative of the church attendance on an average Sunday. This was a big event. All the churches around were shut down. Beacon Falls, Ansonia, Derby, Milford, all in the area, all their pastors came to help celebrate this. And according to the story, there were some 250 people, all of whom, I presume, in subsequent sittings, had dinner in Perry's Hall. This is the beginning of the changing of the appearance of Amity Road as it went by the churches. At this time, that level, if you notice, looking at the stone wall on either side, was dropped almost 12 feet in some areas, 10 to 12 feet, to cut down the rise on this hill. And at the same time, our church was moved back about 16 feet so that it would not be sitting on a lip that went right down to the highway. This is a better picture of that parsonage, which most of you probably know now as Child's House. I put this in so that you could see what the nature of the surrounding area of the church was back at the time when airplanes were flying early in Bethany. This is an aerial photo taken by Alice Bunton and Ellie Downs. Alice will tell you about the ride. I don't want to go into it too much because 2 or 3 of the things come into the subsequent talks. The talk on the town hall, but you'll notice that things were pretty vacant in there, and these sheds are quite shorter than those that are in a photo that's around here somewhere, right up here, that you may want to look at. That's a very interesting photo. This was in 1951, I believe, our first group painting expedition. Back when you could get things done like that by just telling people we're going to put on a dinner and we want you to come and paint. And the people turned out in force. This was typical of what went on after World War II, and the men were back home again and their kids were starting to get ready to go to church school, and they really appreciated the church. You note that right there is a bulkhead. That 1948, they put the first furnace and did away with the church stoves. This is about the time I came on the scene. We were here in 48. We attended church in 49, became members 1950. I was a deacon. I put this in because at this period, this is where most of the church activities were held outside of what went on the Sunday Sabbath during the actual church service. Over here was our Sunday school. This is where the men's club met that formed in about 1949-50. This is where we held all the bazaars that started to raise money for the parish house. In general, this was quite a part of the church, as we said about Perry's Hall before. This was built, I think, around 1913, and that's the time that Perry's Hall disappeared. This is where we got together a manual to send out to people to tell them that we were going to build a church, a parish house for the church. Very scary time. The estimate for that came to $100,000. We didn't see how we could possibly raise more than $60,000. This is a group, very nervous group of men that went out to try to raise our share of it at the time. We borrowed from here and there with the help of the church as a central group, both at state and local. And when we had $20,000 to raise, and I tell you, $20,000 then looked like $120 today, or even about twice that much. Interesting thing, it was all men. Here is the way the church looked at that time, with a sign saying, yes, we're going to build. But I just want to point out, it shows where the parking area was for the church. When I first came here, you could sit inside, look out and see your cars on the lawn. You knew they were perfectly okay. And then I should tell you, oh, what the heck. Am I on my time?
No.
When I was a deacon, we had 3 deacons. And there was no point in having 3 of them all at one Sunday because there was only about 15 or 20 people in church. You attended because you wanted to be sure you were there. Otherwise, the percentage dropped a lot. But, you know now, there's nothing in the church except space. There's no water or anything else. On the stairs, on the left-hand side of the church, we used to get together the grape juice and the elements. We only had a box that held about so many. And so he filled 2 boxes because, like some weird chance, we had a christening or something, and you got more than the normal crowd. In other words, about 35 or 40. You had to go back quick and refill the communion plate on the stairs. Okay, here's where we started to dig, and I said we'd get back to this story about the stovepipes. I ran across in the historical discussion a little note that Russ Winter had got together and interviewing Mrs. Beecher. And Mrs. Beecher, this was before I talked to some of the other older people in the congregation, and she described the stoves in the back of the church and the pipes going up through the floor and along the ceiling. And I said, oh, Mrs. Beecher is wrong, because you can see in that picture the stoves go underneath. I said, well, I know how to check that to see which one of them is right. And so I got this slide out, and as you can plainly see, the pipe hole is right there. But it's also there and there. This just shows it's getting underway. Finally getting it up, but not finished before snow. This is where we're laying the cornerstone. You recognize Dwight Downs there. And our contractor, Mr. Dillon, Harrison Baldwin, the architect. And Mrs. Booth, who is known as Nanny Booth. This is Uncle Dwight. That's Aunt Bertha, which to me said a lot about the church at that time. This is at the ordination of our first pastor, Malcolm first minister. The next longest until Bill was here for 17 years was 1 or 2 at 11, 1 or 2 at 8. And all the rest stayed only 1 or 2 years, which indicates right away that they were either graduate students coming back to Yale to get a further divinity course, or they were just finishing college and spending a couple of years here to get their feet on the ground before they took off for places a little bit more remuneration. But here we have our first full-time minister who is in residence in town. And this was the celebration. And that's Mrs. Perry, for some of you who might remember her. Marianne Woodard, first white again. And this was our kitchen. Not quite complete, as you can see. Probably you know Harris, possibly Jean Rosina, possibly Ed Anderson. This was the 200th anniversary of the church, which probably is now getting into where many of you were either present or in memory. Mrs. George Howard, Uncle Dwight, and George, I can't remember. That date, thank you. Right. Picture of the group out in front of the church. Several of them were in costume, as you can see. It was quite a day. What year? 1963. 200 years after 1763. Yeah, I'm stretching my math. These were the pastors present at the service. There's Mac Gillespie on the right, Reverend Putnam, Dr. English, and Chuck, our foreman, our local pastor. I stuck this in for Alice's sake. She's here. This is her mother, Lita Bites, and Bites. And the Howards over here. I'm not quite sure who those are. This is where we burned the mortgage. Madison Whitlock, right? And maybe you recognize some of these other people. This looks like Virginia Whitehead to me, but I'm not sure. Then the next change in our church was to build what we now all call the upper room. It's actually an upper ceiling. This one leaked. And rather than repair it, we spent the money on raising and making provisions for a future room up there. And here we are, present day, or as the church looked when it was built. Take your pick. Thank you. There is up here an action which was presented at the 100th anniversary that supposedly was found in the steeple when they made some repairs at that time. And a couple of pictures and some others are on the stage if you like.
here to talk about the church across the street, Christ Episcopal Church. And again, I'm going to be using a number of slides. I'll comment on them as I go along. So here we go. This picture was taken from the steeple of our church, and it shows the Christ Episcopal Church. It shows the rectory next door, and it also shows barns and other buildings behind the rectory. Because when you came as a rector, you got about, maybe $400 a year, maybe 10 cords of wood, and then you got the priceless use of this land. You could farm it. You wonder how people made a living. But that is an overview taken from the steeple of the Congregational Church, showing the Episcopal Church and the rectory and the barns and the carriage. There was a carriage shed for the rector, and there was an outhouse. They didn't have indoor plumbing in those days. Here we go.
What year is that?
What year? I have no idea. I would say, before the building of the parish house, it would probably be in the 1950s. Because the parish house is not built yet. Those barns were taken down. The parish house was put up in 1964. This is the sign that was in front of our church for a number of years. It was designed by, carved by, painted by Theodore Sizer. And it says, Christ Episcopal Church, Bethany, established 1799. This church built in 1810. David Hoadley, architect. Well, the only problem I have is 1799, because we have some evidence that the Episcopal Church, not as a building, but as a group of people, existed before 1799. And you'll see that a little bit later. This sign is no longer in front of the church, but it's now inside the church, mounted on the back wall. So if you ever want to see it, just go into church. The church is open all the time. Whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not sure, but it's open all the time. You can go in and see it. This is the present sign, which is hanging in front of the church. Again, it says organized 1799, but again, I think it goes back further than 1799. And here's the reason I say before 1799. This is a pewter communion vessel, which is presently stored in the Woodbridge Historical Society. But it was presented in 1771 to Christ Church. So 1771 is a little bit before 1799. And that is the bit of evidence. This was presented to the church. 1771. That's a very interesting piece of history, because if you didn't have that, how far back does the church go? This is a map which shows the location of the first church. Now, again, there was a building that preceded the church that is there now. And that building was near the intersection of Tuttle Road and Carrington Road, church corner. So there was a building, but it was a very, I would say, poorly constructed, but it was never finished inside. There was no laving, there was no plaster, there were no regular pews, or just Baptist benches for people to sit on. But it was located near the intersection of Tuttle Road and Carrington Road. And this is a picture of the field where it was probably located. Now, someone would probably have to do some digging. Maybe they could find some evidence of the church. There's nothing there now. The church was abandoned about 1805. It was very, very, I would say, poor building. So, once they abandoned that first church, then the question was where to meet. And the reason they have this picture. This is the Holy House. And of course, right here you have Falls Road. I know all about Falls Road. And that's the old Amity Road. And the members of the Episcopal Society met in the ballroom of this building. This ballroom was, I guess, the biggest room in any place in town, and that's where they met for a number of years. It was in the ballroom of the Holy House. This is a more recent picture of that house. Of course, now it is subdivided into a number of apartments. But at the time that the Episcopal Society was meeting, it was not subdivided. There was a very lovely room on the second floor in the back, the ballroom, and that's where they had their meetings. Plus, they also used one of the town school buildings, the Union School. It was also a place where they met until they could construct another building. And this is just one small corner of that ballroom on the second floor of the Holy House. A number of years ago, plaques were put on some of the historical buildings in town through the efforts of Joe Fair and some other people. And this is the plaque, which was mounted on a church. It says 1809. Well, money was collected over a period of years. It was very difficult to raise money. The Episcopal Society did petition the General Assembly for the right to hold a lottery. A lottery to raise money to finish the church. Because in 1809, they put up the framework, the framing made of hewn chestnut beams. They put the framework up, but they didn't have the money to finish. And they asked for permission from the General Assembly to hold a lottery. I don't think permission was ever granted. Maybe that was because basically Connecticut was a theocracy, and the state church was a Congregational church, so what chance the Episcopalians had? Okay, the lottery. But anyhow, they raised money. They raised money. Some people who didn't have any money to give gave their time, their labor, just as people do now. And so in 1809, the framework was put up. And then David Hoadley of Waterbury, Connecticut, one of the outstanding architects in the state, self-educated, was hired to finish the church. And it was finished in 1810. And he was paid the princely sum of $37 plus years interest. Tell you something of the value of the dollar. Here you have the church around the turn of the century. Notice that while it is white, it has a color on the trim. And you notice that there are shutters on all the windows. The shutters are all closed. But that's another story for later. Here is the church somewhat later, more up to date. But it still has, I can see, well, the shutters are gone. The shutters are gone. There are no shutters. And the whole building is painted white. The colored trim is gone. Here you have a detail in the front of the building. These are the upper part of the original doors. The doors on the church now are the original doors. They were taken off at some point, were used in the basement of the rectory to make up part of a storage room for wood. In 1920, they were rediscovered, cleaned up, put back on the buildings. The doors on the building with some repairs, some of them got rotten up and had to be replaced, but these original doors. And that is a window, a very lovely window above the doors, but you don't get any light through it because behind it is a wall. So it looks very nice. Anyway, there's a lot of light through that, you don't get any. That's all right. This is the tower, and that was one of Hoadley's device is what we call a false window. It looks like a window. And there's one on each side. There's one on the north side, one on the south side, one on the west side. And those are not windows. Those are just painted. Look like windows, but believe me, they're not windows. Very interesting device. And this, you can see the one on the north side, and you can see the belfry, and you can see the part above the belfry, which is covered with tin and is painted, and that's very nice. That very nice shot. Of course, in the distance, in the background, you can see the old town hall. I'd like to point out that the pine clapboards on this building, except for the ones on the east wall that have to be replaced, these are the original clapboards, nailed right on the studs. There's no wood under these clapboards. And the windows, of course now the windows are covered with plexiglass to protect them. The windows in the church are the original windows, with much of the original glass imported from England. We exported lumber, then they sent us back the finished goods. Sounds like Japan. And this, of course, is the like lightning rod, and there's a interesting star-shaped structure on the top. That's a very different church. This is the rectory next door, again around the turn of the century. The extension on the side has been removed. This is what they call, the front part is called a half house because it's only one room deep. It's only one room deep. And here, this is later. This would be about 1957, 58, when the rectory was being restored. The rectory was first constructed in 1825. It was used by whoever was the rector at that time. And then around 1918, due partly to the decline of the population of town and other factors, from 1918 until 1958, we did not have a rector in residence. We had divinity students come up from Yale. We had rectors come in from neighboring towns. We did not have a resident rector from 1918 until 1958. And so when we got a full-time rector in 1958, Bill Bryson, they went through the process of doing over the rectory. And when I say doing over the rectory, they spent $22,000, which was a lot of money back in 1950. You could buy a house for $22,000. And they did over the plumbing. They will actually put it in plumbing. They did electrical work. They put a furnace in the basement. And they did it completely over, getting it ready for the rectory. But you can still see that in the back is the barn. You still have the barn and the outhouse and the carriage shed and all of that. This is a very nice picture again around the turn of the century because you can see the church and the rectory and the shed and the barn in the back. Across the street from Presbyterian Church is a carriage shed. And I have to tell you that this is the one remaining church carriage shed in the state. The entire state. This carriage shed, this is only a fraction of the original shed. The original shed was much longer, but they had to chop off one end of it when they widened Vanity Road. This shed was built in 1858, and each section of it was for one family. People would contribute money to build this shed so they could have a place for their horse and their carriage while they had the service. Of course, services in those days were a lot longer than they are now. They went on all morning and all afternoon. Because people now, they go to early morning service, they get through 20 minutes. But in those days, it was a full-time production. And the horse and the carriage had to have protection. So they built this shed. Chestnut beams, very nice work. And there is the carriage shed. And here's another view. See the inside. And that's kind of nice. Advertising some product out there. But those are chestnut beans. Chestnut beans. Well, the carriage shed fell into a state of poor repair. And around 1970, the question was what to do with it. It almost ended up in Sturbridge. And the people in Sturbridge were willing to come down, take it apart, number all the beans, haul up to Sturbridge, put it back together again. And we'd have to go to Sturbridge to see our carriage shed. And so people talked about it, they felt real bad about it, they didn't want to lose it. So we got a private foundation that donated $1,000. The parishioners came up with $1,500. So for $2,500, we had Dudley Sandell and another fellow from Oxford go to work, and they basically did a lot of repairs on it, put a nice, authentic wood shingle roof, and so we still have the carriage shed. It still needs more work. Anybody else know, if you have a couple $1,000 to do it, give it to us, we'll spend it on the carriage shed. It needs work, but it is the one and only remaining carriage shed for a church in the entire state of Connecticut. This is a very famous painting. This actually hangs in the White House. And I understand that President Reagan and his wife actually used this as a basis for a Christmas card one year. And it's based on a Currier and Ives lithograph. And it shows, of course, it isn't totally right, but there's Christ Episcopal Church with the wrong speaker, but that's all right. And the carriage shed is to the south of the church, which of course it is across the street, but that's all right too. And there's the Rectory. So what they did is they very conveniently put all the buildings on the same side of the road. And that's a very famous painting. But that is based on, although you might not look totally like it, that is based on Christ Episcopal Church. This is a photograph taken again around the turn of the century, and something very important happened. By 1875, the church needed a lot of work. And if the people in Bethany had really had money, which of course they didn't, they really had money, maybe even one millionaire who would give money to the church and have another church built in memory of his wife, something like that, then they would have torn the church down, which they did in many towns throughout the state. Around 1875, these wooden structures, these frame structures, these post-colonial churches were torn down and replaced by neo-Gothic Victorian stone churches with stained glass windows. For example, if you want to see one like that, there's the Episcopal Church in West Haven, facing the green. That's exactly what happened. They had a church like this. It was torn down and replaced with a stone building. Well, people in Bethany didn't have that kind of money. They never did have it. So the question was, well, we can't afford to tear it down, so we'll have to fix it up. But we want a neo-Gothic church. So we're going to take this post-colonial church, which inside was nice and bright and cheerful, and windows, and we're going to make it into a neo-Gothic church. So we're going to put shutters on it, and we're going to close them. Keep them closed all the time, so they're nice and dark inside. I'm not kidding. That's what they did. There they are. You're out there. You can see the barn and the rectory, and there they are out front. But notice the shutters closed. And this is the interior of the boot barn. This is the interior. And what they did is they made it Gothic. made all the surfaces they could dark. The east wall, that's the east wall. But they originally had a, what we call Rector's window, regular window. But they took that out and they put that stained glass window made by Sears Roebuck. Because those were days when you could buy anything from Sears Roebuck. Anything you want to buy, you could buy through Sears. And they bought that stained glass window, and they took out the pulpit window, that gave light for the minister preaching. Of course, at that time, back in the good old colonial period, they had an elevated pulpit. I'll show you later on a very interesting drawing. But anyhow, they took that out. They took down the pulpit. The back wall they covered with this paneling. Lost 2 windows in the process, but that was all right. And the corners, in each corner up front, they constructed these rooms for vestments. So we lost the corner of the church through these vestment rooms. They put a saying above the altar. Of course, back in the colonial period, they didn't have an altar. The focus was not on the altar. The focus was on the spoken word, the sermon. And of course, this was this elevated pulpit. But they took the pulpit down because that was a new emphasis. The emphasis now was on happening up on the altar. And they put in this altar, this heavy, carved, massive altar. They put the communion rail. They didn't have a communion rail before 1875. They put a communion rail. They put in the pews. They took out the slips. They put the pews in. And they made, to the best of their ability, they made it into a dark, Victorian, neo-Gothic church. That's the way it was. This photograph was taken in 1940s. And you can see the chandelier. There's a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Of course, you can see the galleries. But notice how dark the wood is. You can see the communion rail up front. You can see that paneling that covers the windows. Notice the windows up above, the two windows that are covered with shutters. And of course, they've got their stained glass windows, Sears Roebuck special. Neo-Gothic. They couldn't afford the kind of Gothic church they have in West End. They couldn't afford to do that. They couldn't afford to tear it down. But by golly, they were going to have a neo-Gothic church, and that's what it is. That's a close-up of the stained glass window. If anybody really wants to see this window, I understand it's stored now up in the attic in the church. But we didn't get rid of it, we just took it out. So it's still there. You can see, you can get a better view here of the paneling. The saying above the paneling, "Ye shall reverence my sanctuary, I am the Lord." Well, that was added in 1875. They wouldn't have anything like that before then. But they had it. This is a reverse shot. This is facing toward the back of the church, what is now the west wall. And up above, there is a tracker organ. Bought in 1885 for the princely sum of $1,200. Tracker organ. It's not there anymore. They took it away. They had it out worth a fortune, but that's beside the point. Again, the windows were covered. Of course, there was a lovely Palladian window, but that was covered by the organ. But that was all whack. They didn't want light in the church anyhow. They wanted dark. You can't see them, but there were these. Mr. Gooch talked about the stoves he had in the Congregational church. We had stoves too. They were in the back of the church, and you can see, if you look very carefully up here in the left-hand side, you see one of the stovepipes that went up and again, and full length of the gallery, on the underside of the gallery, and to the chimney, which was on the back wall. So there you have the west wall of the church. That was another one of those neo-Gothic additions, a marble baptismal font, which was added about the 1880s. Before that, they would use a basin. But now, of course, we had to have a marble. Because we'd like to have a stone church too to go with marble, but we settled with the marble farm. You can see the date right there, bottom, AD 1879. It's this whole process of making it into a Gothic church occurred in 1875 and the years after. And this is a memorial plaque, which originally, if I go back a couple of shots, if you look over on your right-hand side, you can see the rector up there. And if you look to his left on that wall, you can see that's the plaque. That's the plaque that was put in. That was put in, again, around the time that the church was made into a neo-Gothic church. Now the plaque is mounted on the back wall of the church. There it is. So Theodore Sizer's outdoor sign is now indoors on one side, and this memorial plaque is on the other side. And again, if these people had had real money, then all the clear windows of the church would have been replaced with stained glass windows. And there we are, there we are, there we are. But no one had that kind of money. So we have the original windows, except for the one that we replaced, the stained glass window, and now that has been taken out. As I say, we did over the rectory. Bill Bryson became a full-time rector after 40 years of not having a full-time rector. And yet the church was growing, increasing in size, and we needed a place for Sunday school. We already have Sunday school. So we needed a parish house. So they tore down the barns, and in 1964 they built this parish house. With, well, the middle part has a pitched roof, but the wings had flat. Well, this is a lovely building for Southern California. Flat roofs and New England just don't go together. Okay? You learned that, we learned that the hard way. I mean, those people, they put that pink roof on, they knew what they were doing. But here we have this thing that was built in 1964 with windows that ran from the ceiling to the floor. Does it go with the church? No. Does it look colonial? No. Did it have problems? Yes. Did the roof leak? You better believe it. But it was functional. Inside it had some really neat features. Walls and roof, it was great. For a place to have classes for kids, it was great. Nice kitchen, all that, but the roof leaked. And the windows were impressive. The kid could run right through a window. Well, in the interim, we put pitched roofs on those wings. We replaced all the windows. So now it doesn't look quite like that, but it's not exactly a colonial building either. This is a very nice picture because this shows the church more as it looks now, because they decided that, this neo-Gothic was fine and dandy, but really, around the 1970s, we decided we wanted to go back to the way it looked in that post-colonial period. So they went back to the much lighter colors. They took out that horrendous stained glass window. They put a window that's so hard with bright light you can see it, but there is a nice window that's more in keeping with what they had originally in the church. But the corner rooms are still there. The communion rail was moved, but the communion rail is still there. So the front part of the church, the chancel of the church, is still, in many ways, a Victorian part of the church. They couldn't bring themselves to going back all the way, because to go back all the way, they would have to tear up the corner rooms, take the paneling out off that wall and reveal the windows that are behind it, but they didn't do that. But they did go as far as they could go to make it look the way it did back in the time between 1810 and 1875. Now, this is what I talked about before, because during this revision, or what I call the 1970s revision, and during this revision, there was talk of actually building the kind of pulpit that was in that church back in 1810. Because you see, he had this problem, and we have the problem today, because when Peter Steminger is lecturing to us, giving us one of his sermons, the people in the balcony, except for the ones who are in the very front of the balcony, have a hard time seeing him. But back there, when they built the church back in 1810, the people in the balcony didn't have a hard time because it was an elevated pulpit. It was an elevated pulpit. He climbed up these stairs to get to this pulpit. So the people upstairs could see you, the people downstairs could see you. Of course, the people downstairs had to walk up, but very well. He had an elevated pulpit. And around that time, people thought, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice to go back to the elevated pulpit? And this is a drawing. I actually hired someone, and I think this is a very, very nice drawing of what it would look like if we went back to the elevated pulpit. Also, of course, we would tear out those corner rooms. And now you would see the windows on the bottom, on the first floor, as well as the windows on the second floor. Because if you go to church now, those windows on the bottom floor, on the back wall, you can't see them. They open into those corner rooms. And the paneling on the wall covers the windows. Well, this was somebody's idea. Let's build an elevated pulpit. Let's go back and have a real post-colonial church. And of course, this is a view looking down on the pulpit. Of course, the original pulpit had two sets of stairs, one on the right, one on the left. This would have one flight of stairs. It'd still have the communion rail, but the corner rooms would be gone. Well, we didn't do it. We didn't build the pulpit, and we didn't take out the corner rooms. Perhaps for a variety of reasons. I suspect the biggest reason was money. Of course, the altar kid would have been all upset, lost those corner rooms, because where would they, do their flower work and all that? Where would the record stores and estimates and all that stuff? So they never tore up the corner rooms. So those bottom windows, go back one shot here, those bottom windows are not in view. They're there, but they can't be seen. This is a closer view of the back wall. Of course, when Canon Hensley came, he came after Gustav Barrett. He came into church. The first thing he realized, he said, it dawned on him that there was something drastically wrong. And what was wrong is that, for that saying, "You shall reverence my sanctuary, I am the Lord," the background was black, navy blue. I don't know. It's a very dark color. My wife told me it wasn't black. She knows the color. I'm hardly colorblind. I was thought it was black. So Canon Hensley comes, he takes one look at it, he realizes, this won't do. So at his own expense, he paid for it, hoping that it was repainted. Because he did the gold work over again, but the back now is a much lighter color. And that's the way the church looks today. Of course, the stained glass window is gone. So you got the pulpit window, but you don't have the pulpit. You don't have the pulpit to go with the window. Okay? If you go up into the gallery on the northwest corner, there's a very narrow door. And if you open that door, go up a very narrow flight of stairs, you get up into the bell tower. And I can remember going up there and hauling on the rope and ringing the bell. Of course, the only problem is the whole tower moved. It was all right. But then they decided that they're going to put a new organ in. You got a new organ. And the people who put the organ said, well, this, having the tower move might, disturb the organ. So what they did is well, the bell's still up there, but it doesn't move anymore. They have this neat electrical thing, you push this little button, this thing comes up against the bell, and it's not the same thing at all, but the door is still there. The door is still there, you go up inside, you climb the stairs, the rope used to hang, you haul on the rope, it was really nice. And then you really adventuresome, there was some more stairs that went all the way up the tower to the bell, while they're going up those. This is the organ loft, the organism again. This is not that beautiful 1885 tracker organ. This is another organ. They saved a lot of the pipes. But this is, you can't see it, but behind that organ is a very nice pallated window. But the organ partially covers that. The problem with having these older buildings is you have to meet modern day codes. Modern day codes, older building, modern day codes. You have to appreciate, there's a building that was built in 1810, and it's still there, just like your church, and the Congregational Church is still there. And just this week, down at Amity, down at Amity, they just tore down a building, a two-story building, masonry building, which was put up when I was teaching there. It's maybe like 25, 28 years old. They just tore it down. Tore it down. And here's a building that's, been there since 1810. But you have the codes, like the fire code. Like, how do you get out of the gallery if there's a fire? Well, you come down the front stairs. Yes, but suppose the front stairs are blocked. Then how do you get out of the gallery? Uh-oh, we had insurance. We can either put a fire escape on the outside, iron fire escape, you can just imagine what that would do for the church, or you could put another set of stairs. So Canon Hensley said, well, fine, we'll put another flight of stairs. So these are stairs leading up to the gallery in the front of the church. The rooms, of course, now they lost part of those corner rooms because the stairs cut into those Victorian corner rooms, but I have to say this, these stairs at least look like they belong in church. These are post-colonial staircase, but there's one on the opposite side. So now if you're in the gallery and somebody yells, fire, you got a choice. You come down these stairs, or you come down the ones in the front. That's a very nice scene. Now I like that because over in the gallery, on the north side, are some of the original slips. Those are the original slips that were put in way back in the colonial period. They're very uncomfortable. That straight back, very narrow seat. If you're really kind of a little bit bigger, you have a heck of a time with it. But then those are the original slips. And of course, you probably wonder, why do your slips have numbers on them? Why do your pews have numbers on them? And the answer is, because back in the colonial period, that was the way they raised money. Every year, they had an auction. People bid on where you would sit. And of course, the best seats were in the front, I guess the poor seats were in the back. And people would pay as much as maybe $15, $20 for the pew for the year, and the pews in the back would be maybe as low as $2.50. So they would raise, this went on up to 1900, from 1810 to 1900, major source of income was the annual rental of the pews. They would raise maybe like $400, $500, and that was enough to pay the minister with money left over. Okay? So if you want to see what the original, not the original, because when they first built the church, they had box pews. I don't have a picture of them, I can't show it to you. They had box pews with doors. They were great. But they didn't seat enough people. So they took those box pews out and they put in these Quaker-style slips, of which we have some up in that. You can see it up there in the north part of the gallery. And they put in these slips. And then, when that 1875 neo-Gothic, time came in. They took the slips out and they put in the present pews. But those pews down below are painted white. But during that neo-Gothic period, they were dark, along with everything else. Okay? So there is the church more as it looks today. And there's a close-up shot of one of those slips. Go up and try one sometime. Of course, back then, they didn't have the cushions. Those cushions are a recent addition. They didn't have the cushions. They must be something. So that is one of the original slips. On the opposite side, on the south side of the gallery, those are not the original slips. These are the originals. Down below, that's a close-up shot of the pews. And you can see the number? You can see the number on there. Well, that was number 24. Every year, they had the auction. The families bid. Of course, that one is toward the back. So I'm probably bringing about $2.50 rental fee for the year. Very lovely details in this church. I mean, David Holy, the architect, really had a feeling for details. And so when you go in there and you look around and see all these magnificent wood details. Of course, back in that 18th century time, they just painted these all brown, made it dark. But now, of course, they're back to what you call carved pillars. Those are wood, actually carved. Detail of one of the supports for the gallery. Looks like a mast of a ship. Because remember, only for all his work and effort, got $37 plus interest in 1 year. But did a magnificent job. And I'm going to end here. This is, I think, a very nice place to end because, again, this is that scene. I guess we've seen it before. You're coming down from the north. Past the police barracks, which of course are not there, but you're coming down. This is a magnificent highway. This is the highway. This is Bethany Road. This is Bethany Road now. So, and there you can see Congregational Church is on your right, Episcopal Church, and the Rectory, and the barns are on your left. That's what it looked like. Again, around the turn of the century. Of course, it says right down the bottom there, it says Episcopal Church and Rectory, Congregational Church. Okay? So that's the way it is. Okay.
That's our program. Don't forget, April 29th, we'll be going over the Old Town Hall. Britt will be giving us that. Thank you to Ed, Ken, that was super.